Hello, time then for the press preview. It's our first look at the front pages, and tonight joining me to see what's making the headlines are the director of the John Smith Centre at the University of Glasgow, Kezia Dugdale, and the PR consultant Alex Deane. They'll be with us from now until just before midnight. Chat to them in a second after we've had a look at those front pages for you. We're going to start with the FT. According to the paper, official figures showing that real terms wages are falling at their fastest rate for 20 years likely means inflation won't come under control anytime soon and will increase the pressure of the cost of living crisis. British workers need more graft, says Liz Truss. That's on the Guardian front page after the emergence of that controversial audio clip this evening, while the Express has her attacking EU bosses for breaking a research agreement to punish the UK over Brexit. The Metro hears that Ryanair intends to lay on extra flights out of Stansted Airport because the airline's boss, Michael O'Leary, is frustrated at Heathrow Airport extending its daily passenger limit through the October half-term holidays. The former Prime Minister, Sir Tony Blair, has called on the government to ensure every adult gets the upcoming Omicron booster jab. That's according to the Eye. The Mail reports that cyclists could soon be forced to have number plates and insurance under a radical shake-up of the road laws. The Telegraph hears from a former immigration minister who says Theresa May's modern slavery law is mainly to blame for the number of illegal immigrants who avoid deportation. The Star reports on Ryan Giggs' testimony at his trial for assault. He denies all the charges. Same story, in fact, on the front of the Daily Mirror. And The Sun shines light on pop idol stars Darius Dinesh's very sad death. Don't forget, you can scan the QR code on screen at any time during the programme and you'll be able to check out the front pages of tomorrow's papers while you watch us discussing them. And Kezia and Alex are with me now to do just that. Great to see you. Thanks for joining us this evening. Kezia, why don't you kick things off? We'll start with the cost of living crisis and yet more bad news with this record fall in wages.
Yes, I'm afraid so. So this story comes off the back of new Office national statistics data that shows in the 3 months leading to June, the value of wages fell by 3% in real terms. That's the biggest fall in 20 years, and it's led for the Resolution Foundation to say that it's going to take us back to a cost of living squeeze that feels like 1976, 1977. So more bad economic news. Interestingly, though, there's some real detail in this that might surprise you. For example, they also report that it's leading to lots of people over the age of 65 returning to the labour market, an additional 180,000 over 65-year-olds seeking to work. I think that's a clear sign as any we've had so far that the cost of living crisis is really biting.
Yeah, Alex, the figures show that average wages rose 4.7% between April and June, but of course that's been outpaced by inflation, so the real value of pay fell by 3%. So I suppose everyone will be looking to see what happens over the next few months to inflation.
That's right, Jonathan. And I think, too, that that 4.7% rise in wages is more than we would normally see. So the employers are trying to keep up, but the trouble with inflation is even higher. We knew that this was coming, didn't we? This has been projected and foreseen for some time. And I think it does two things immediately in terms of politics today. The first, obviously, putting pressure on the two candidates for the leadership of the Conservative Party and therefore to be Prime Minister to clarify their economic plans and to say whether or not they are inflationary and if so, how they deal with it. And the second is really put into sharp focus the commitments about things that government can do quickly, even if as a matter of fact they are not the most substantive in their effect, like the green levy on energy bills. That's very hard to maintain, no matter what your position is on climate change and in the long term. It's going to be very hard for people facing these kinds of squeezes to say government should still be taking that kind of money from people as we go into what is also projected to be a pretty tough winter.
Yeah, Kezia, just looking at the front of the Times, in fact, we know that those hustings this evening in Scotland. Rishi Sunak turns on rival over moral duty to ease bills. The former Chancellor insisting that if Liz Truss becomes Prime Minister, millions will face poverty. What have you made of both contenders' bids to solve the crisis?
Well, of course, they're talking in that context about energy costs, which aren't factored into these figures that we're talking about just now around the cost of living crisis, because that only leads us up till June. So there's no doubt that it's going to get substantially worse this winter. And the cost of living crisis and the energy bills in particular have been a key focus of the Conservative leadership contest. But with neither candidate really having a plan that meets the size of the challenge ahead. Talking about energy bills in excess of £4,000 for a year, some reports saying it could be high as £5,000. Yet these leadership contenders are talking about handouts and using pejorative terms like handouts around the £400 mark. So that's really not going to make a difference to the majority of people who are really going to feel the bite of those increased energy bills.
Yeah, Alex, I don't know if you managed to watch the hustings this evening or read much of what was said, but what are you making of where the two candidates stand?
Well, the thing is, when it looks like you've got a clear leader, and whatever you think of these candidates, it does seem like Liz Truss is firmly in the lead, it tempts the underdog to go to further extremes to try and shake the dial and move things in his or her favour. And this is an example of that, because this is clearly a kind of pretty robust, would be the polite way of putting it, attack from one of the rivals against the other. And I suppose my first point is this: the Conservative Party, with these months-long kind of blue-on-blue attacks within its own ranks, is generating future billboards for the Labour Party. Here is a former Chancellor of the Exchequer saying some very unpleasant things about the person very likely to become our Prime Minister. I think in retrospect, people will be saying, did we really need months long for the membership? Do the membership really need that much longer to make up their minds than our members of Parliament do? And I anticipate one action coming out of this is going to be shortening any future leadership contest timetable.
Yeah, I mean, that's the issue, isn't it, Kezia, that for every week that goes by is another week where the crisis isn't solved.
Well, that's true, and I've got some sympathy with what Alex says, but at the same time, this has to be a thorough and democratic process. It's only members of the Conservative Party that are going to choose the next Prime Minister, unless, of course, they call a general election, which feels highly unlikely. So we should have an extended period time to scrutinise their policies and look at what they stand for. But when I look at the detail of their policies, I don't think either are really rising to the challenge. The story in the front of the FT also includes a quote that suggests that interest rates will have to go up again in September, potentially by 0.5%, rising to 3% by the end of the year. That will panic MD right now who's looking at getting a mortgage. It'll be further economic woes right through the winter. This is going to dominate the political weather for some time to come. And the back and forth between the Conservative candidates is, I'm afraid, exactly what we need to shake out who stands for what and what they're going to do for us.
Yeah, except that the one point on that is, of course, interest rates have been historic lows for a long time. And for everyone that has a concern on their mortgage on the one hand, which you rightly point to, there are savers who are not getting the kind of returns that they might like to have in their retirements, and particularly lots of less well-off people who are dependent on their pensions, which in turn are invested in things. So interest rate rises are not all bad. They can actually not just bring an economy's temperature down a bit, they can bring real rewards to people too.
OK, let's move on to the front of The Guardian. Pippa Crerar, the political editor, kicking off her new job in style with this scoop. Liz Truss condemning British workers for what she said is a lack of graft, and also British workers lacking the skill and application of those from abroad. Really fascinating comments made, not recently, but a few years ago. Kezia, what did you make of this?
Well, this is true to form for Liz Truss, because it wasn't so long ago that we were recounting paragraphs in a book that she'd jointly written with some other leading Conservatives, where she called Brits work the worst idlers. So I'm afraid it's just another example of her showing what she really thinks. And it will play well, I think, probably amongst the Conservative base, who, as we've just discussed, are voting in this contest. But it won't play well in the country. And I think in particular, it's a bad news story for those people who left voting the Labour Party for generations to vote Conservative, perhaps for the first time, in so many of those red wall seats that defined the last general election. So it might work on the floor of these hustings, but it'll cause jitters in Conservative HQ.
Yeah, I mean, Alex, will it be that damaging, really? Because it's not necessarily going to affect the vote for the leadership. It could have more of an effect when a general election comes round, but by then the public may have forgotten about this.
Yeah, I dare say people running campaigns think, let's cross that bridge when we come to it. But of course, this wasn't a deliberately planned leak or announcement from the Truss campaign. This was Pippa Creer off to a big bang with her new role, and good for her for a scoop. But Kezia and I do agree, actually. This is not out of tune with what we've heard from Liz Truss for a long time. And she may phrase it and couch it in different ways sometimes. She's very fond, rightly, of pointing out the fact we've got a productivity problem in this country, that British workers' productivity is lower than our peers. But Kezia is right. The book Britannia Unchained is out there. Authors took joint responsibility for it. The candidate that I support to be our Prime Minister, Liz Truss, has said for some time that British workers need to do more. And I think also it's true, this won't really hurt her amongst Conservative Party voters. I think lots of people have thought that for some time. So all in all, whilst it's good news all round, I suppose, good news for the journalists getting a scoop, good news for Liz Truss. And in a few years' time, if it comes to an election, I don't think it's going to be in the forefront of people's minds.
Yeah, she described them as the worst idlers in the world, I think, didn't she? And very quickly, just 30 seconds to go, quick look at the front of the Metro. Kezia, Ryanair to the rescue.
Yeah, so this is Michael O'Leary taking a grab and having a go at what he describes as hopeless Heathrow. He's going to ensure that more flights leave instead from Stansted this coming October, so people can get more of a holiday in the time that comes. This is down to the fact that Stansted have done a better job of retaining so many of their ground staff. They've not had the same labour market problems that have really troubled Heathrow throughout the summer.
Very quick thought, Alex. Michael O'Leary on the front of the paper as well. Good publicity for him.
Brilliant PR. What a headline. The dream of that sort of thing. The man knows how to catch the mood of the moment, doesn't he?
Yeah, and you would know as a PR consultant. OK, thank you both. We'll speak again in a moment. Coming up in a minute, is Theresa May's asylum policy to blame for fewer deportations in recent times? One former minister thinks so. We'll discuss that next. Alex and Kezia are still with us, discussing tomorrow's papers, front page of the Daily Telegraph. Alex, why don't you kick things off for this part? Modern slavery law is biggest loophole for migrants.
Yeah, we were talking about blue on blue earlier, and this is a different kind of blue on blue, I suppose. This is Chris Philp, the former minister responsible for immigration, claiming that Theresa May's modern slavery reforms, which are meant to help people who'd been, forced into slavery and used, garage forecourts and made to work in menial jobs and for inappropriate pay, or here or abroad, could find asylum and could find permanent place to stay in the United Kingdom, is being widely abused. He claims specifically that not only is it much easier to claim that you have been a victim of slavery than it is to claim other conditions, and that the hurdles are very low. There's basically no burden of proof to demonstrate that you've been a victim of slavery to get that protection. He also claims that people who've been coming to this country, making one claim or other that hasn't been working, and then switching to a claim of slavery when they realise that they haven't been making headway. I mean, either way, it's a real headache for the Home Office to have people making these points. But if he's right, it's really got to stop. And you'll see in the piece too that Priti Patel has promised a clampdown. The problem with all of these internal arguments about what the Tory party has been getting wrong is the natural question from people is, well, why haven't you done it already? And that question will no doubt be forthcoming because of this story too.
Kezia?
I think this is a really astonishing and quite striking story because, it's been referred to as Theresa May's Modern Slavery Act. She's not somebody known as being particularly liberal or soft on immigration by any stretch of the imagination. She was the original architect of the hostile environment. She was the person who sponsored go home vans during her time of being Home Secretary. And here she is being accused of basically being a lefty liberal when it comes to these immigration issues. We're talking here about people who are being exploited for labour. They are potentially victims of being trafficked for sex. They are very vulnerable people that could even be in domestic servitude. And yet we're being told that they are the people who need to provide evidence of what's happened to them in order to stay in this country. It's a really quite astonishing story that'll stick in the throat of a lot of people that want there to be immigration controls, want there to be a strong and robust system, but still for there to be legal routes for people who are facing some of the most extreme destitution to make a life in this country and to flee horrible circumstances like this.
Because you can't mean that they don't need to have any proof, do you?
Well, I'm just wondering how you can expect them to have proof. How do you prove that you're being exploited when you have nothing and you're utterly destitute and you've been under the circumstances and existence that many of the people who are being exploited for these purposes face? I just think there needs to be a little bit of reality check here about what exactly the burden of proof is and where it lies. You're asking vulnerable people to prove something that for them is probably nigh on impossible. It's utterly heartless. And it's astonishing to see a Conservative figure basically accuse Theresa May of not being strong enough on immigration.
Okay.
But having a plausible account that can be from which inferences can be drawn might be a reasonable start. But you began by your answer by suggesting that these people are victims of slavery. So you assume that it is automatically true. I mean, that would mean that someone could simply come to this country from anywhere, say, I am a victim of slavery, and with no more ado, have a permanent right to remain in the United Kingdom under our asylum laws. I mean, that can't be right, can it?
OK, I tell you what, we can talk. We're out of time, but we will talk more in a few minutes' time on that story if you wish, and if you choose it from the papers, we can discuss it further. But for now, we must leave it.